Welcome everyone to Best Virginia Podcast, where today I have a really cool guest with me, Dr. Kristy Sumner. She is a part of Soul Sisters Paranormal. They are a paranormal investigation group consisting solely of women. I'll let her explain a little more about that. But the reason I brought her on today is that she has some experience with some of our hauntings, namely the West Virginia State Penitentiary and Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, which I'm super pumped about both of those things and hearing about your experiences today.
Well, thank you for having me, Jordan. I'm really excited to chat with you today as well.
Absolutely. So as we were chatting before this, you told me that you had some roots in West Virginia.
Yeah, absolutely. So my mom was born in Glendale, West Virginia. My grandpa was actually a prison guard at the West Virginia State Penitentiary for a few years. And then he became the chief of police of Glendale, West Virginia. He was chief of police for almost 30 years. As chief of police, he was also chief of the fire department. He was head of the waterworks. So basically, he was a one-man show around the town. So a lot of roots in Glendale. We still have family there. So it's just a great state to be from. Even though I was born in Florida, we do have those strong roots there in West Virginia.
Absolutely. And that's amazing. Your grandfather sounds like an amazing man. That's wild.
Yeah, he really was. There was nothing that happened in the town of Glendale that Kenny Pickett didn't know about.
I
They
can't even
actually,
imagine.
yeah, they actually have a Kenny Pickett Day, in celebration of kind of what he did. And, for a time after he passed, my mom actually had a scholarship for the local elementary school there, and they would write essays about what it was like to grow up in Glendale. And coincidentally enough, one year Brad Paisley actually won that contest.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, so
That's really cool.
it just kind of, like I said, just kind of those interesting roots, those interesting stories that hail from West Virginia.
Yeah, and that's one of my favorite things to talk about. One of the main reasons I started this show was to talk about all the cool stuff we have to offer. Not the least of which is our weird side, which is one of my favorite parts. You see, I'm representing the Mothman today.
I see that. It's a great shirt.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites. And so I want to talk a little bit about, first and foremost, Soul Sisters. Tell us a little bit about how that came to be and a little bit about what you guys do.
Sure, absolutely. So I am the founder of Soul Sisters Paranormal. And as you said, we're an all-female team. It's made up of myself and my twin sister. And we're occasionally accompanied by our younger sister and our family friend, Cara, and another family friend, Kim. We started out as that group of 5 women. But this last year, due to COVID and different life changes, it really became just a 2 investigator format with my twin sister and I. But we started in 2014. We've always had a fascination with the paranormal. And it actually started as a girls' trip to Moundsville, West Virginia. We were there for just to get together and have a girls' weekend. And coincidentally enough, we had a family friend that sat on the board of the West Virginia State Penitentiary. So he said, while you're here, why don't you stay the night in the prison and see if you can communicate with our resident spirits there? And we jumped at that opportunity because we always wanted to go on a paranormal investigation to really see what it was like. And so we jumped at that opportunity. There was just a group of women there in the jail that night, or the prison that night. And we left that experience with what we felt was compelling paranormal evidence, footsteps running through the darkness, doors slamming. We captured some things on audio that we couldn't explain. So after that, we really decided to form what we call a professional paranormal team. And that was Soul Sisters Paranormal. So it started there in Moundsville. Our second investigation was the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. So we started off with a big 1-2 punch there in West Virginia.
Oh, wow. And I'm trying not to jump too far ahead of myself, but I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that you revisited the penitentiary later on.
We did. Yeah, we did. We've been there twice. We've done 2 investigations there. Like I said, the first one was extremely rudimentary. It was just one of those things that we wanted to see if we would enjoy it. So we had a couple of night vision video cameras. We had a couple of voice recorders, a couple of digital cameras, nothing too extravagant at that point because we were just really starting out. And but the things that we captured were what we felt was extremely compelling. Like I said, you're sitting in this dark former penitentiary, and you hear a door slam in a neighboring cell block and you know that nobody's there, or you're sitting in the dark infirmary, no lights really illuminating anything, and yet you hear footsteps running at you so loud that you think something is going to materialize and nothing does. And so again, that was really what jump started us on this journey with Soul Sisters Paranormal.
No doubt. And so, here in a little bit, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit more about some of your evidence, if you don't mind.
Sure.
But also, I want to hear, from reading and from looking into some of your work and things like that. I noticed that you all do stuff all over the country and have done
Mhm.
some really cool stuff. So, do you care to talk about some of your favorite investigations, or some of the ones that stand out the most to you?
Sure. Asking to me to tell about my favorite one is kind of asking me to like pick my favorite child, because they're all different. The first and foremost, the thing that really compels us to do this is the history of these locations. We get to have a very tactile experience with locations that not a lot of people get to visit. So to your point, we've been to West Virginia State Penitentiary, Trans-Allegheny, the Lizzie Borden House, the Villisca Axe Murder House, and to have these experiences, to touch those walls and walk on those floors, or touch those doorknobs, is really why we do this and what drives us, because we want to tell the history of these locations in a very complete narrative that people might not know about, in order to preserve these locations. So each one is very unique from the historical perspective as well as from the paranormal perspective. But I'd say the one that really fascinated me the most, outside of West Virginia, of course, was Fort Mifflin in Philadelphia. That was interesting to us because that was where we captured our first shadow figure that we couldn't explain. We had a night vision video camera set up in a subterranean casemate, and we had a laser grid sitting next to that night vision video camera. And during the night, when nobody was around that camera, something materializes out of the wall and walks from right to left from the camera's view and cuts off the laser grid beams. So to us, that's extremely compelling and unexplainable. So Fort Mifflin was a great location to investigate. Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary here in Tennessee, in Petros, Tennessee, was extremely compelling. Again, things that we just can't explain. Footsteps, door slams, men's voices when there's only females on the property. And when we go into these locations, we really try to control the environment as much as we can. And by that, I mean, we make sure we know where the light sources are. We make sure we know where noise sources are, and really try to rule out those type of contaminants. And so when what we capture is what we call unexplainable. So to hear these things and pick these up on audio and video, is extremely, like I said, compelling to us. So every place that we've gone to, we've been very fortunate to capture things that we can't explain. I'd say probably the most compelling one with regard to paranormal activity was the old Gilchrist County Jail in Trenton, Florida. And this was a jail that was in operation from 1928 to 1968, very small footprint. It only had 4 cells on the first floor and then 4 small cells on the second floor. It was just a county jail. And then after it closed in 1968, it sat vacant up until the early 2000s. So it really became a haven for drug activity and unsavory individuals that would go into that building. But when we investigated there, like I said, we were having just a great night of capturing footsteps, voices, door slams, shadow figures. So I'd say as far as paranormal activity, that would be the one that was the most compelling.
Wow. You answered my question in spades. A very difficult question, I imagine. Because like you said, because whenever you started talking about that, I was thinking, my job is as a psychologist. So I was thinking, like, what if someone asked me what my favorite case was? Like, that's not a question
Mhm.
I would be able to answer, I don't think.
Mhm.
So, as something you do and put your heart into, and your family. I think that's so amazing. And you hit so many of the points that I wanted to talk about today in one thing. So I'm trying to organize them in my head. Um, um, but one of the most important things I think you said is in reference to the history of
Mhm.
those places. And, because I feel like paranormal and history go together. Like, you can't have one without the other, obviously,
Correct.
because there's always a rich history, which is what makes, from what I understand, um, is for what creates that level of activity in that area and concentrates that level of activity in a certain area,
Mhm.
as opposed to, just like, oh, I'm walking down the street and suddenly a ghost appears, or there's a breath on the back of my neck, or whatever,
Mhm.
whatever type of evidence there could be. It seems to be concentrated in certain areas with a rich history, and or at least those are the ones that draw our attention the most. So, and history is a huge interest of mine. As a part of the show and a part of my life, I love learning everything I can. I probably get on the nerves of my wife and my family and everything, because I'm always asking questions about everything, even if it
Mhm.
doesn't seem important to other people. But I think that's how we learn things and how we start to see, open our mind and start to see things that others don't, which is, leads us to paranormal investigation. And um, with that being said, I wanted to ask, one of the first questions that came to my mind for you was what inspired you to get involved with paranormal investigation? Was there a triggering event or something you can trace your interest back to specifically?
Well, there was never really a triggering event per se, like, oh, I saw this apparition or something like that. My sisters and I have always come from a very a research-minded background, if you will. So our parents, to your point, have always said, ask questions to get the answers. And so we've always had a fascination with the paranormal. We do come from a religious Christian background, but we always wondered where are we going after this? What's the next step level after we die? Is there something else to that? And so we started watching, Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, the early 2000 shows when they started to become popular. And we really found ourselves saying, why didn't they ask this question? Or why didn't they use this technique? Or why didn't they do that or this? And so we always said to ourselves, if we had the opportunity to go on a private paranormal investigation, then that's what we were going to do. And it really presented itself with Moundsville. And so to your point, it really was one of those things that it just it kind of grew out of a fascination of research. And what we really strive to do is bring that historical narrative to the forefront first and answer the questions that we have about the location, and then hopefully parlay those into preservation efforts for these locations. Now, while we do go to the larger, what I would call commercial places like Moundsville or Trans-Allegheny or the St. Augustine Lighthouse, we really do prefer going to the smaller locations that not a lot of people know about. For example, we investigated the Ma Barker house in Central Florida, and this was the site of the 1935 shootout between Ma and Fred Barker and members of the FBI. And it really culminated in the death of the gangster era in 1935. And even people that live in Marion County, Florida, didn't know this history, didn't know this story. So when we presented our narrative and presented our findings, we had newspapers calling us, TV people wanted to interview us on what we did because we were the first team to investigate the location. And it really enhanced preservation efforts. People wanted to go, people wanted to take tours based on what we did. And so for that was like one of our crowning achievements so far, to get recognition to that location. And that's what we want to do with all the locations that we investigate.
Yeah, and that's something that I noticed about whenever I was looking into that I noticed about your website and things like that, is you all do make an effort to point out the historical aspects of things, of the places that you investigate, which is, I think, part of what makes you all stand out so much. You all, you look at all different angles from it, other than just a paranormal lens. You look at it in context of, what happened there, the history of the area. And I believe I was listening to some other shows that you've been a part of, and one of them referenced the Lizzie Borden house, which blows my mind, because that's such a cool story, and such a cool, just has such, just the whole thing is just great. Um,
It is an interesting story for sure.
Absolutely. But like you mentioned, being able to walk through those places and, get a sense of the layout and get a sense of, just kind of put yourself into that mindset and put it in context, other than,
Mhm.
just kind of stating what your findings were, which,
Mhm.
I think puts a whole new level to it. And
And
oh,
And
go
I'm
ahead. I'm
sorry.
sorry.
Yeah, thank you for recognizing that. That's exactly what we want to do. For us, we consider ourselves true paranormal investigators, and that encompasses everything from the history to the paranormal. And that's the route we've chosen to take. Now, others may consider themselves more ghost hunters, where they just want to go in, find something, and boom, that's it. Or YouTubers that just go in and say, "Oh, I'm going to walk through this and show you all the scary places and maybe get touched and stuff like that." So there are different facets benefits to the quote unquote paranormal community, but we consider ourselves, to your point, really those that get in there and delve into the history first, because it is so important, and then couple that with any compelling pieces of evidence that we find during that investigation.
And I think that's, like I said before, that's really what makes you all stand out to me. Because I've always been drawn to the paranormal, whether it be, ghosts or apparitions or cryptids. I love the unexplainable, because
Hmm.
that's what drives us forward. And like
Exactly.
I said before, I'm always interested in learning more. And the more I don't understand, the more room there is to learn.
Hmm.
And you all, I think, do that in a great, in a great way that, like I mentioned before, encompasses the history and the geography, and, just the, like you mentioned before with the Ma Barker situation,
Hmm.
looking at how it impacted the whole, like the country as a whole. I mean,
Hmm.
that's a really important aspect of a lot of things, that people even in their backyard, they don't recognize. And
Exactly. Yeah.
so preserving that history and looking into it and putting it in a way that's interesting and that's accessible to other people, to other like-minded individuals, I just think that is amazing.
Oh,
Um,
well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Like I said, huge, huge fan of just the whole
Oh.
the whole thing. But like you mentioned before, talking about the history of, you know of things and how it's intertwined. There's so much. One of my favorite, like, in the context of West Virginia, one of my favorite ghost stories is the story of Mamie Thurman. I'm not sure if
Okay.
you're familiar with that or not.
I'm not.
I was going to say, if you are, amazing, because it is such a, like, it just has, I did an episode on it in season one, but it was about, I'd say about 30 minutes from where I grew up, in my original hometown of Logan County.
Hmm.
Um, so I moved across the border when I was like 2, but my dad was from Logan. So, it's a story that takes place in there, but it encompasses so much. It took place during the Prohibition era, and her husband was a police officer, and there was just this whole situation where she was allegedly having an affair with a government official, and then she was murdered, and someone was falsely accused, but her ghost tries to point you to where she was,
Oh.
where her body was disposed of. And the legend goes that if you go to this certain place, and park your car, your car will actually roll uphill. And
Nice.
yeah, and that's what I grew up hearing, was stories like that. And the more I, especially, I was super pumped about looking into things like that.
Hmm.
But no, even people that just grew up down the road from me have no clue. And
Hmm.
it's so important, not only because it's interesting, but because it had to do with our government. It also had to do with in the context of the history of the era, like, because the last place she was seen by other witnesses was at a speakeasy,
Hmm.
which is like hip now, but
Right.
was a thing that, like, you just did because that was the only option you had back then. And
Hmm.
it puts the whole thing into perspective, and all in this little town of Logan, West Virginia, which was our big city, which is crazy to me now that I've actually seen more of the world. But it does really put things into perspective, being able to see the historical side, the paranormal side, and also, my one true love is, or one of my most one of my most um one of my most adored parts of humanity is the driving force of why we do the things that we do.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, that's why I became a psychologist. That's why I like making these connections with people, with my guests, with my fans, or listeners. Fans is such a strong word.
You
Um,
got fans. Go with it,
yeah.
Jordan. Just go with it.
Okay, fine. Yeah, I got so many fans.
There you go.
Um, but to be able to build connections, but also to see, like, what drives people to do the things that they do, like
Hmm.
murder, and commit these crimes, but also, like, what drives them to stay tethered to our world, like, after their time here.
Hmm.
And I think that's something that has always um, really stuck with me, is just wondering, like, would tether me to this plane? Like
Mhm.
if I were to pass today, what would or would not keep me here, as opposed to some of these other people, like the ghosts that are, or the spirits that inhabit the places that you investigate?
Mhm. Yeah, and you know that's a great that's really the sense of exploration, right? That's really the quote unquote last frontier that we really can explore. And the thing is, everything that we're dealing with here is theory. You know, we're never going to find the answers, concrete answers, until we pass, right? I think the late great Betty White just said it, that she was not afraid of death because there was the big secret, the big secret that everybody will experience, that we'll know the answer to one time at one point, but we don't know yet. And so, to your point, this is a fascinating study. This is why we really try to delve into this a little bit deeper, the way we do it, with that research mindset, because we do want these answers. You know, when we're going into locations that, as I said before, I know there's only 2 or 3 females, we have the complete control of the environment, yet I'm capturing a man's voice, or I'm capturing a child's voice, or something's moving of its own volition. That to me is extremely compelling, and I want to know the answers why. And so we've had opportunities to communicate with these spirits, on some level. And you know, for example, we'll go back to the Ma Barker house. You know, when we asked the question, what happened in this room? We're sitting in the room where Ma and Fred were killed by the FBI. And so it's just my sister and I. And I asked the question, what happened in this room? And we got the response, they murdered us, we the ones dead. And so for me, that is their story. That's what they want to convey. And yes, they were terrible people in life. You know, they were gangsters, bank robbers, murderers, but their narrative is they were murdered by the FBI. And so if we can tell that story, if we can convey that message, you know, again, that's something that we felt very privileged to do with Soul Sisters Paranormal.
And you know, like you just said, you just keep saying things that are blowing my mind. So because of like the work that I do, like what you just said, their perspective was that they were in the right and they were cut down by the government.
Hmm.
And you know, to me, I think that is so important as perspective, because
Hmm.
I know, like, I know you didn't mean it this way, but you said that they were terrible people. You know, like as far as what you and I consider great people, they maybe weren't the most savory, like you mentioned earlier, but they believed that they were doing what they were supposed to. And just like you, what if me going to work tomorrow was considered terrible by someone else? And
Right.
you know, because that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Why is that bad? Just
Hmm.
like they were doing the things they were doing to support their family, to do the things. So to be able to get other perspectives, whatever means necessary, I think that is absolutely amazing.
Hmm.
And one thing that you really stuck out, the way you said it earlier, was the way that you do things. I forget which what way you worded it, but something I noticed was that you all do use different techniques, and the word techniques in this context is kind of foreign to me.
Hmm.
But I want to know what your techniques are as compared to other investigation groups.
Well, what we do is, you know, it's similar to others in the paranormal community, but as I said before, we really come at this from that research mindset. So, you know, I've got an advanced degree. My twin has an advanced degree. You know, everybody on the team, we have advanced degrees. Not to say that that's better than anything, or anybody else, but I say that to say that we come at it from a very research-minded perspective. And so, for us, the very first thing that we want to do is we go in with a healthy skepticism and actually try to debunk any of the paranormal claims that our predecessors have found. And so we'll go into a location the day before or the day of our investigation during the daytime, and we'll look for things that could cause light pollution during the night or noise pollution during the night. So we look for street lights, we look for train tracks, we look for airline traffic, dogs in the neighborhood, kids in the neighborhood, anything that could be considered that if you hear it while you're inside the location or on the property that you're investigating, if you hear it, you can immediately rule that out as not being paranormal. So for example, we were called to investigate a business in Florida, and he was convinced that his business was haunted. He had some night vision video cameras up, and he said something kept messing with him during the night. And so we said, we'll come and investigate. And so he had a brick and mortar location. Obviously, it was a glass storefront. It had some mirrors running down the side. He had display cases. And so we went in and we investigated for probably about 4 hours. And none of our equipment really alarmed to anything. We weren't feeling anything in the moment. But we left some night vision video cameras and we left them run during the night, and we left the building. And so when we came back the next day, I asked him, I said, did your cameras alarm or go off? And he said, oh yeah, it was a very active night. And I said, well, give me the timestamps and I'm going to cross-reference them with my cameras. And so when we did that, what we found was the way his building was positioned, it was running perpendicular to, or running parallel to, a road that had a high volume of U-turn traffic. So when the cars would make a U-turn during the night, the headlights would bounce into the building, bounce off his mirrors, and essentially blind his night vision video cameras to the point where they were turning off and then turning back on. And so I told him, I don't think you have a haunted building. What you have is just a light pollution problem. So turn the cameras or move them or take the mirrors down, and I think your haunting will go away. And it did. So those are the things we look for first. So we take all of those notes during that pre-investigation, if you will. So we'll take notes on that, and that really drives our nighttime investigation. So we'll go in during the night, we'll set up night vision video cameras. We have pieces of handheld equipment that we take with us, things that are designed to measure electromagnetic energy, voice recorders that will record audio, obviously video that will record video. We have different things that will alarm if they're acted upon or if there's vibration or movement. We have laser grids that we'll set up, anything to really capture either movement or voice or, quote unquote shadow figures. So that's really how we conduct that investigation. And then once we're done with the investigation, we will take all of that audio and video footage that we captured, and then we will sit and listen to it and watch it in the raw. So I don't put it through any audio software or video software. We watch it as it was recorded, and we listen to it as it was recorded, to really give the investigation justice. And because of that, like I said, we found some things that we just can't explain in most of the locations that we go to.
And I think that sounds to me like your true goal.
Mhm.
Whenever you said earlier that you go in with a healthy skepticism and with the goal to debunk whatever you're looking for. I
Mhm.
think because psychologically, we can make ourselves believe anything
Exactly.
if we put enough effort forth. Because if our belief system is more loose, then of course we're going to incorporate anything into it.
Mhm.
But if we go into a situation with the intention of, proving ourselves wrong, then, that's when we can see truth. And I think
Mhm.
that's the important thing. Also, to kind of rewind and touch base, you said that with that particular example, you were investigating a business. Because
Mhm.
I noticed that's what you all do a lot of as well, is investigating businesses and residences, which I think is super cool.
Mhm. Yeah, correct. So we have people that will call us and either investigate a private residence or a private business, and we'll absolutely go in and do that. Again, we follow the same routine that we do with the larger, what I call commercial locations. And the reason that we really concentrate on some of these commercial locations like Lizzie Borden or West Virginia State Penitentiary is really to build our portfolio, and it allows us to try different techniques that we can take and use at these private investigations. So to your point, we will have people call us and or email and say, hey, I think my place is haunted. Can you come and investigate these things? The very first thing that we'll do is we'll hand them a couple voice recorders and say, for 24 hours, just hit record on this thing, go about your life, and see if we'll see if we can capture anything that way. And then we'll go in and we'll do a more extensive investigation of the location. We also do the research background. We'll go to property records. We'll go to libraries, the old school library way, and look for things that might have affected that property. Did anybody die on the property or in the house or in the residence or near the business? Has there been any tragic event? Native American land, if it was that at one time, is that an influence on what we're seeing? And I'd say probably about 25% of the places that we investigate, we can find an answer that we do not consider paranormal. that it is a light source or a noise source that they didn't consider, or something that they just weren't aware of. Because I mean, sometimes when you're in your house and you're just going about your day, you're not aware of some of the outside factors that are going on, like a train or like airplane noise, or helicopters or anything like that. But there are some places where we found, again, things that to us will put in the unexplainable category. Now, any time that we do a private investigation, we don't publicize that. We give the homeowner or the business owner all of the data that we collected, all of the evidence that we collected, and we say, you can do with this what you want. We do not publicize it. That's on you. And here you go. And so if they want to release it, they do, but we don't.
And, I think that's on a couple different levels. I think that's a great approach, because, you're not, basically what I'm saying is that while you do investigate some of the more commercial areas, that tells me that your heart's not in the place of just seeking recognition. Like you mentioned earlier, you consider yourself true paranormal investigators, which, based on what you told me and some of your work, I do as well, because you all, you do try to rule out all of the factors that you can control. And that's a really big deal, because there are so many things that we register that we don't even realize that we are, like light pollution and helicopter noise and, things like that we just tune out, that we're used to, or that
Exactly.
that our brain deems unnecessary for survival. If it's a helicopter in the distance or whatever, so be it. Our brain's like, okay, it's just a thing passing by. It's no big deal.
Exactly.
So there's so many things that we don't even, process, that we experience. And I think that also applies to the paranormal. There's so many things that we rule out, based on reality, or our version of reality that's been influenced by what is explainable. And you mentioned 25, correct me if I'm wrong, you said 25% of what you said or what you investigate can be explained by other factors. And on one hand, that doesn't sound very big, but on the other hand, that's pretty statistically significant. 25% is a lot of variability.
It is. And like I said, when we go into these locations, it's not like we're stepping into and we find some compelling evidence. It's not like the walls are shattering and glass is rattling and doors are flying open and all of that. If you're if you're a paranormal investigator, that's really not, you don't find stuff like that. It's not like you see on television or in the movies where it's extremely sensationalized. For us, if we go into a location and we're there for 8 hours and I capture 3 or 4 whispers or voices that I can't explain, that's an amazing night for me, because I'm hearing, like I said, a male's voice that I can't explain. So for example, when we went to the Lizzie Borden house, there was an instance where my sisters, Michelle and Jenny, were just standing there talking in the parlor. Everybody else was upstairs and it was just the two of them talking. And there was a voice recorder there and a man's voice said, "I'm standing right here next to you." And that is extremely compelling, right? For 2 reasons. One, there's no man standing there, and two, it's intelligent. It knows that Jenny and Michelle are having this conversation, and he's like, "Hey, I'm standing right here next to you." So and that to me, even if we were to only capture that, that's an amazing night for us, right? That to me is extremely compelling. So to go into these locations, like I said, it could be something as just as subtle as a voice or just a door rattle or something like that. It's not anything extreme. So there have been cases where we found just 1 or 2 pieces of evidence, but that to me is extremely, like I said, compelling.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact, again, earlier you mentioned a couple pieces of evidence being compelling. Well, that's pretty, I mean, even a couple per night is a higher percentage than most people experience in a lifetime. And to be able to talk about the things that you experience, when you experience, I'm sure you mean, sorry about my cat.
That's okay.
When you experience, I'm sure you're talking about that you sense. And your senses, there is so much research that suggests that our senses don't pick up on everything that actually happens around us. And between reality and our senses, there is a lot of disparity because, there is the fact that color does not exist until we see it is a huge
Right.
thing.
Hmm.
Like there are colors and light waves and sound waves that we can't experience,
Hmm.
that we know exist. Like other people won't say that, no, those aren't real. But they exist. There's proof. There's proof that those things exist,
Hmm.
like certain colors and certain variations of colors and certain sound waves and light waves. So there is proof that we can't perceive everything. Um,
Right.
so, lending to the skepticism earlier, the fact that I know there are skeptics listening,
Hmm.
there's proof that you can't see everything and you can't hear everything. It's just not possible to. I mean, there are things that you don't recognize or pay attention to,
Hmm.
but also the things that you just cannot process, that are just extra, what I would consider extra dimensional,
Hmm.
which,
Good word.
I think, going back to what you said earlier about being intelligent, these apparitions being intelligent, I think is such a huge statement because, there's proof that there are other dimensions than what we can perceive.
Hmm.
And there's scientific proof. You can't deny that. And there's a lot of research that says that. And, there are also a lot of sci-fi movies and things like that I probably love, but also that contradict it. But the fact that there's so much evidence that goes like, hey, there's 100% things that are happening around you that you could never even understand
Right.
without proper equipment. And even then, who knows? Like their equipment advances every day,
Hmm.
technology advances every day. So there are things that we can know now that would have been a joke 10 years ago.
Hmm.
And like you mentioned earlier, with some equipment being rudimentary, or like some of your early investigations as compared to now, whenever you've got more advanced equipment and things like that and are able to sense things, there's stuff that's not even been invented yet. That stuff hadn't even been invented, you know, 10, 15,
Hmm.
20 years ago.
Right.
So we're able to learn things that we would not have been able to learn based on where we're at in the world,
Hmm.
so many years ago. So
Right.
the fact that reality differs from what we perceive, I think, is a really big part of what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to go back to your point, the senses do play a big part in what we do. When you go into a location such as West Virginia State Penitentiary and it's completely dark, you're relying on senses other than sight. Your hearing becomes extremely acute. Your smell becomes extremely acute. Just to smell cigarette smoke or cigar smoke or whiskey smell. Stuff like that. And your sense of feel, to feel vibrations, and stuff like that. So we are relying on things that are other than sight. And I think the way we conduct our investigations is we go in with the respect of the history and with any entity that we're trying to communicate with. So we base our investigations on the fact that we are going to attempt to communicate with something that had a human existence. They lived, they died, and for some reason they're at this location. So we go in with that respect level. And I think because of that, we get the respect in return, i.e., we get communication. We don't go in with bravado or thumping our chest or anything like that. We legitimately want to tell their story, and that's what we tell them. And I think because of that, we do get those responses that maybe some other teams don't get. That when you go in and really try to provoke a spirit to communicate with you, to us, that's unnecessary. And so to be able to do that and get those responses, it is that respect level. And I think the people or the spirits that we're trying to communicate with, they were people at one time. And nobody wants to go through life not being recognized, right? The very core of human existence is to be noticed, to be accepted, and to be in a group. And I think the same thing is with these spirits that we're trying to communicate with. So when you go in and you try to sit down and actually have a communication with them, and you give them that respect, I think you'll get a response because of that. And like I said, we've been very fortunate to get those responses.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, for what that's worth.
Mhm,
But to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but at least my perspective is that if you have difficulty moving on to the next plane or the next dimension, if you're kind of tethered to here, there's a level of humanity that that has to be acknowledged, as
mhm.
far as there's something. I'm kind of I subscribe to again, I don't know if you do or not, but I've subscribed to the thought that there is something that is keeping those spirits here or those
Mhm.
apparitions here,
Yeah.
whether it be something that was kind of unachieved, or an unmet need, whatever that
Mhm.
is. And our needs drive us as living beings.
Mhm.
So and that is energy that is generated. So where does that go?
Mhm.
And I've always kind of thought of the extra dimensional or paranormal perspective as energy, because
Yep.
that's energy that you're noticing, that your senses are
Right.
registering, which is high enough to where your sensors are registering, because there are sound, like I mentioned earlier, there's levels of sound and visual waves that are not high enough to even recognize. So there's something that is reaching out to these people and to you
Mhm.
that is strong enough to bring about a response. So what about that is tethering you to this world, or at least to our perception of it.
Right.
And I think that is, to me, that makes me obviously question a lot of my own existence and things like that, which is a whole different podcast. But
Well, I mean, and that's what we're doing, right? I mean, everybody's going to die. That is just a fact of life, and it's the want to know what's going to happen after this, right? So to your point, I truly believe, if you subscribe to the theory that we're created of energy, and energy cannot be created or destroyed, we have to go somewhere. Something happens after we die. And to your point, I personally, I think there are three reasons why a spirit may be close, what I'll call closer to the veil between this and whatever's next. The first one is unfinished business, that there's something that has to be fulfilled or achieved before that spirit can move on. The second one is that they just don't know how to reach that light, right? They know that they're dead, but they can't find the direction to get to the next realm, or we'll call it the light. I think we see this a lot with children. They just can't find that way. And then the third one is the fear of retribution, of what's happening, going to happen next based on the life they lived. And I think that's what we see a lot of with jails and prisons. They're completely fine with staying where they were, or what they're comfortable with, because they don't want to face a quote unquote hell or retribution in the next realm. And so those are the three theories that we kind of work on. Again, they're all theories, and we're all working with theories on this, but those are the ones that we operate on.
for sure. And as far as like a lot of energy being focused in prisons and things like that, I think that crosses, again, I feel like you and I could do a whole totally different podcast about this stuff, because there are so many people who believe they did what they did because what they thought, or because they did what they did because they thought it was right. And to ask them to, okay, you've spent the last 15, 20, 30, 40, even 50 years serving this life sentence or this sentence because of what you believed was truly right or what you were supposed to do. Now you get to have no control and move on to the next life, and who even knows what that is. So
Mhm.
there would of course be that resistance. And
Right, right.
uh,
Yeah,
you
I,
know
I think you and I would differ a little bit on that. I
okay.
think that some people just have a moral compass that, they may, I mean, they may not, they know it's wrong, but they still proceed with that action that morally, as we as humans think morally is incorrect. So I wouldn't say that they were quote unquote thinking they were right, but it was what gave them the gratification, and what moved on from, again, that direct moral compass, as we would describe it. So, yeah, but again, back to that point, I do think that that fear of retribution, especially when we're talking about things like West Virginia State Penitentiary or Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary, those spirits that we've connected with, I think they're just comfortable where they're at, and they don't want to face whatever's next. And again, who knows what that is? I'm a Christian, so I do have my belief set, but who knows what it is. But those are the theories that we're working with when we do these investigations.
Yeah, for sure. And I respect that. And I think having, obviously from a scientific perspective, you have to have a set of theories that you're operating from
Hmm.
whenever you approach each experiment, so to call it.
Right.
So I do think, you have to have what you're looking for, or otherwise you're just, making a YouTube video that, is or is not cool. So,
Right. There you go.
so I do think that is important. And, uh, again, I think, having an idea what you're looking for and looking to disprove that, I think is super cool. It's a good approach, from a scientific perspective and a humanistic approach, because, we're much more likely to believe things uh, that coincide with what we already believe in, than as opposed to creating a new schema for how we look at things.
Mhm.
So if we believe something that contradicts what we already believe, then there's a higher likelihood that it is true, or is at least valuable in some way.
Mhm.
So I could talk about this stuff for years,
Yeah,
on
you and me both.
end. So to try not to keep you for too long, um, earlier we talked about the changes in equipment versus when where you started with a couple night vision cameras and things like that, or a couple night vision cameras and digital cameras, and then you were talking about laser grids and stuff like that, which is
Right.
totally sci-fi to me, which which is not a bad thing to me. But so I do you care to talk about some of the equipment you use, or
No, not at
what?
all.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So like I said, the basic that we start with is the voice recorders. We don't go anywhere without them. And in fact, when we start an investigation, as soon as we cross that threshold into the day investigation, we have our voice recorders running, because contrary to popular beliefs, hauntings just don't happen at night, right? They can happen anytime. We've captured some of our best evidence during the day. So for example, when we went into the Lizzie Borden house, or we went into West Virginia for the second time, our voice recorders are going immediately. So, and they run throughout the duration of the investigation. So we have those. We actually have 12 of those. So one we all carry, one that each of us will carry, and then we leave them in different locations, and they'll be stationary during the night in that location and run for the duration of the investigation. So we have those. We have night vision video cameras. We've got 15 of those now, where we will set up in different locations and again let them run stationary during the night. We all wear body cameras, so we have our point of view perspective, as well as it gives us a timestamp of where everybody is at a particular time. So for example, if I'm listening to audio and at 8 o'clock in, the infirmary, I capture a noise I can't explain, I'm going to go back and figure out where everybody is at that time to make sure it's not one of us causing that noise. So we wear body cameras. And so then that kind of rounds out the audio and visual part of it. Then we have pieces of handheld equipment that we'll take with us. The first one is what we call a spirit box. And generally speaking, it's an AM/FM radio that's been modified to very quickly sweep through frequencies. So when you turn it on, you hear as it's running through these frequencies. The idea is that the spirits can use the white noise to communicate with us. So they'll essentially talk through the frequencies. So for example, when we were at the Ma Barker house, when we captured They Murdered Us, We the Ones Dead, that was on the spirit box. And if you picture this running so quickly through frequencies, you shouldn't hear a full phrase like that. That's what makes it so compelling. So we use that. We have a device called an EDI box. This is a device that it measures vibrations. So you set it down, and if anything approaches it, like footsteps or anything, it has a vibration meter on it that will alarm. It also has a temperature gauge. If the temperature fluctuates high or low very rapidly, it will alarm. It also has a built-in EMF meter, which is an electromagnetic field reader. The theory is that since spirits are made out of energy, that if they approach this or touch the box in any way, that EMF meter will go up. It'll spike. So it has a light array from green to red, red being the highest. We have what we call K2 meters, again, electromagnetic field readers. They do also have a light array. again, if they go from green to red, and the theory is if you're in a location and there's no energy acting upon these devices, they should never spike. So theoretically, I should be able to set it down in the middle of the room, know that there's no power acting upon it. And if I get a reading at any point in time, I need to figure out what is causing that. So we got several really great hits when we were at the West Virginia State Penitentiary, and there's no energy acting on it, so it should stay stationary. But yet when we get these spikes, that to us is unexplainable. We do use laser grids in conjunction with our night vision video cameras, so we'll set them up beside the video cameras. Again, the idea being that if a spirit walks across, we're more apt to see it if it cuts off those laser grids, and we've used that to some success. And yeah, so we have different things like that. We're also very big on what we call trigger items. So we will research the location, and we will take items designed to elicit a response from the spirits in that location. So for example, we'll start with the West Virginia State Penitentiary on this one. One of the inmates there who is, and I'll go into the story a little bit more in depth in a minute. One of the inmates there, his vices were tobacco and watching Days of Our Lives. So what we did is we took some tobacco in there and some cigarettes, and we downloaded an episode of Days of Our Lives on our laptop, and we let him watch that in his cell. And I think because of that, we were able to get some pretty cool responses off of that. If we're dealing with a child spirit, we'll take a teddy bear or candy or marbles or something like that, again, to try to trigger a response from the spirits that are there. So that really kind of rounds out what we take on these investigations.
Okay. Wow. That's a lot of stuff.
It is. It is.
Again, I think that's, on a couple different levels, I think that's super important because you're hitting it from us, there's so much equipment involved to where like you can't just say, oh, it's just something they felt or whatever. There is equipment that regulates temperature and, whether energy is involved as far as like with the laser grids and things like that, interrupting those patterns that suggest otherwise. So
Right.
that's a big deal. Trigger items. I'm glad you mentioned that. That's something that I mentioned to bring up, or that I intended to bring up as far as, explain what a trigger, you did a little bit, but as far as, what would constitute whether a trigger item is or is not decided for a person, if that makes any sense. If not, I can ask it a different way.
No, it does. So when we go through our history and we do the historical research before we go to these locations, we try to find interesting parallels between any of the spirits that are reported to haunt the location, and again, things that we can take with us to elicit a response from that. So for example, when we looked at the research of the St. Augustine Lighthouse, one of the reports are that there was a light keeper there, and every day or every night he would smoke a pipe. And so we took a pipe with, the pipe tobacco and all of that, and we left it in the room for him. And we say, this is yours. We acknowledge that you're here. We acknowledge that you liked this. And so we're going to leave this for you. When we went to Fort Mifflin, one of the casemates, now a casemate is a subterranean room where they held munitions during the Revolutionary War. They converted one of these casemates into a solitary confinement cell. So you imagine you're 7 feet underground, no sunlight, no air movement or anything, and they've got you in this solitary confinement cell before they hang you for treason. There was a gentleman named William Howe. He was, again, tried for treason. He was put in this solitary confinement cell. So we said to ourselves, what would somebody in solitary confinement want? We took him some bread, we took him some water, and we left a cigarette. We left that in the room for him. We said, this is yours. If you want to partake of it in any way, go for it, but we're going to leave it for you. And so we left it, and we walked out and we started doing some investigating on the other side of the fort. When we went back in, it was just Cara and myself. So we went down into that casemate, and again, we've got things recording all of this. And I said, did you see the things that we left you? We left you some water. We left you some cigarettes. And we captured a male's voice going, thank you. The voice recorders captured it, right? So the body cameras captured it. Everything we had recording captured that. And so for us, that triggered that response from him. Back to the West Virginia State Penitentiary, I'll tell you the full story in a minute, but we got responses from Leaving the Days of Our Lives episode. Nobody else had ever thought of that before, but it was something that we knew that he liked, and we wanted to see if we could get a response because of that. So we'll take things like that. So in our arsenal, we always have cigarettes, especially if you go to prisons. We have some whiskey, we have water, we have crackers, we have kids' toys. We're investigating the Exchange Hotel in Gordonsville, Virginia. And there was the spirit of a young child named Jeremiah that's said to haunt this location. So we got down on the floor, we sat down on the floor, and we were just rolling a marble back and forth and asking him if he wanted to play in this game with us. And we were getting responses because of that. We captured a child's voice, our K2 meters, the electromagnetic field readers started going off. So that's what we really try to do with those trigger items.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And I think
Sure.
the humanistic aspect of that is,
Mhm.
again, what sets you all apart from other groups, but also, how could you ignore that
Right.
as part of trying to interact with other human souls
Mhm.
or spirits or whatever you may call them? How could you ignore the most human part of being a human and
Right.
expect something to be human and interact with other humans?
Right.
So I think, being able to identify what trigger items are, um, is super important. But also, I think, again, that makes me wonder what my trigger items would be, um, which is kind of a scary thought as far as like the fact that I just don't know.
Mhm.
Um, what are your trigger items, or what do you think they would be?
Yeah, honestly, I think an animal, such as a dog or a cat, if somebody were to bring that into a place that I was inhabiting, I think I'd respond to that. And really just talking and having a conversation, honestly, that recognition that, hey, we think you're here with us. Do you want your story told? And again, that's what we do. That's the way that we operate. And as I said before, we've gotten some very interesting results because of that.
Okay. And something you kind of touched on there that you've touched on a couple times that we haven't really acknowledged is the level of respect.
Mhm.
You mentioned earlier, with respect to, to the entities that you're conversing with or interacting with, that's something that a lot of people don't get what they expect to get or what they would like to receive from life or what they even deserve from life.
Mhm.
Um, that's a whole different thing as well. So, I think respect is something that really sets you all apart. Um, you know, eh, while you were saying that, I was thinking, I just still really don't know. But my cats left, or they would be up here as a trigger item. My one cat was asleep here on the table next to me for a little bit. Um,
See, there you go.
yeah, but I was also thinking, have you all ever taken animals?
We have not on on any of our investigations.
Okay.
The reason is we really travel a lot. So based in Florida, but we'll drive everywhere. So it's just a long ride for an animal. Now I will say, my business partner and I have opened a location in Huntsville, Tennessee. It's a jail that was built in 1904. It was in operation until 2008. So she and I, late last year, we actually opened a museum, a crime and punishment museum, as well as a location that paranormal investigators can investigate and really hone their paranormal research. So we have actually, we had a dog in there yesterday, and one of the rooms, the dog, when the owner set him down, he really started growling and just would not really approach that room. And that's a room where we've had some very interesting things happen. So that was kind of an interesting response. Not saying it was paranormal, but it was something that was like, huh, why is he doing that? So I do think that animals have a different sense, and I would love to take a dog or a cat at some point just to see, what. Oh, there you go.
This one is Crash.
Oh, how cute. Yeah, there's actually two here. They're sitting outside the door.
I think the fact that you mentioned that animals, there's a lot of suggestion that animals can interact with other planes, and that can see. Well, there's proof that they can register things that we can't,
Mhm.
whether it be to see things that we can't or to hear things that we can't. So that's just something that stuck out to me that you said earlier was, to take an animal, because there are times where my cats are just like staring at the wall that I'm like, hey, what are you looking at exactly? Um, but
Yeah, there will be some point where we take, we have golden retrievers, so there'll be some point where we take them and just to see kind of what happens. But to this point, no, we've not taken them on an official investigation yet.
okay, that's what our dog is a golden retriever. Um,
Oh, good
he is
people.
blind, but there are times that he just stands and stares at things. So I know that he's able to see more
He's
than we can.
aware. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's
he
aware.
knows what's happening.
Yep.
Um, you mentioned you've mentioned a couple times earlier, but I keep derailing you. Getting into the details of the lunatic asylum, the Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
care to share
So
some of that?
absolutely. So the Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, it was the Weston State Hospital was what it was originally built as. It was built in 1864. It was in operation until 1994. And this building, I don't know if you've ever been, but when you go and you start approach this building, it's massive. It's the largest hand cut stone building in North America, and it sits on about 26 acres. And it was built by Thomas Kirkbride he really wanted to follow what he called the Kirkbride plan, which was, even if you're mentally impaired, you shouldn't be deprived of luxuries. So it was very opulent. It has a lot of wings, a lot of rooms. It was built for 250 patients, and it really had this sense of care and one-on-one patient care between doctors and patients, and it really strove to give those patients really a sense of rehabilitation, right? um, After it was built, however, it really started to decline pretty rapidly because people could be admitted for numerous things: being kicked in the head by a horse, laziness, egotism. They had a whole list of things that you could be admitted for. So a lot of men during that time were like, oh, my wife, who I don't like anymore, experiences those things. I'm going to have her admitted into the hospital. And so once you admitted her, you were the only person who could get her out. And so, you had a large rash of men dropping these women off. So it was predominantly women patients. So even though it was built to house 250 patients, by the time it closed, it housed over almost 2,700 patients. So a lot of overcrowding, and that one-on-one care really digressed into different experiments. So like lobotomy, shock treatment, water therapy treatment, cold bath treatments. So it declined to the point that it was really horrific for the patients that were there. In fact, my grandpa one time, he had to transport a patient to Weston, and when he pulled up, he said never. He would never leave one of his citizens in that location, and he didn't. And so the level of the way it has digressed in the medical care. So anyway, after it closed in 1994, it did sit abandoned for a little bit, and then a private owner took it over. And it does allow paranormal. They do allow paranormal investigations. So when we went into this location, this was late 2015. It was myself, my sister Jenny, my sister Michelle, and our friend Chris, and our friend Cara. So there were five of us, and there were two docents that were there that had to stay on for security reasons. And we set up our equipment, and immediately right off the bat, we were experiencing things that we could not explain. There was one instance where we were in the bottom downstairs hallway, and we asked the docents to come with us. So all of us on property that night were standing in this hallway, and from the other end of the hallway, we heard this blood curdling scream. It was so loud. Everything that we had recording that night captured it, and that was one of our best pieces of evidence. So that was unexplainable. We were capturing children's voices. One of the interesting experiments that we did, we were up in I think it was a third floor room. There was a child that's said to inhabit this room. Her name was Emily. And so there's no power, right? There's no power in this room. So we're sitting in the room, and there's a windowsill, and we had a glow in the dark balloon we had a flashlight and one of our electromagnetic meters, again designed to measure energy, sitting on this windowsill. So we're asking questions of Emily, saying, can you touch the flashlight? And the flashlight goes off. Okay, can you stop that? Can you touch the K2 meter? K2 meter starts going off. And we said, can you move anything else on that windowsill? The balloon rolls off, the light turns on at the same time the K2 meter goes off. So something is acting upon this, and it's something that immediately acted upon it, because otherwise it would have been stationary, right, that whole time. So the fact that something acted upon it when we asked it to was extremely compelling. So things we could not explain. We were capturing men's voices that night, footsteps. So for us, it was a great investigation, and one of those locations that I'm really looking forward to get back to.
And I think that's amazing. The fact that you all got such compelling evidence, but also, you mentioned that you're excited to get back to it. That brings up a question that I had for you of, you mentioned, I've gone back to this a couple times, as far as, the changes in equipment and experience over the years, and just like with any type of profession. Are there any early investigations that you would like to revisit with better equipment or more experience?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So Trans-Allegheny is definitely one of them. As I said, it was our second investigation. So we acquired a few other pieces of equipment by that time. But with what we know now and the experience that we have, I would love to get back to Trans-Allegheny. There's a couple other places, St. Augustine Lighthouse. We did those very early in our investigation cycle as well. So I'd love to get back to the St. Augustine Lighthouse. Villisca Axe Murder House, that was another one. There were some techniques there that we've learned, new techniques that I would like to try there as well. And that's what we do. Everyone is a different learning experience, and you can't use the same techniques at every location, right? So what we used at Tala is much different than what we used at the Ma Barker house, just because they're two, you can't compare them, right? They're both quote unquote haunted locations, but one is a 26-acre, multi-level building, and the other is just a 2-story cracker house. And so you do have different techniques that you really have to really learn how to use in various locations.
For sure. Are there any other areas in West Virginia that you've had your eye on
Oh goodness.
in particular?
Yeah, there's actually, there's one. It's actually called the Bel Air House. It's just across the river in Ohio. I do want to get to the Bel Air House. I do want to get back to West Virginia State Penitentiary. Both times that we were there, again, very early in our careers with this. So there's some other techniques that I would like to use there as well. But and just to go back and visit Glendale and Wheeling and that whole area. As I said before, just finding the local lore and legends is really what we want to try to highlight. So there's a lot of, I'd love to get to the Greenbrier Hotel as well. The Greenbrier Ghost is just an amazing story, even if she's not there anymore, just to tell the history and the story behind that. So there are a lot of locations in West Virginia that is just steeped in a lot of haunts and history and lore.
Yeah, absolutely. The Greenbrier Ghost is also one of my favorites, in addition to the Mothman. Good old Zona. She had her own story to tell. We talked about unfinished business and stuff earlier. She had her own agenda. I won't spoil it too much because I still have an episode in my pocket for that one.
Good for you.
But there are so many different things like that, because that one's really similar to what I mentioned earlier about Mamie Thurman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of this, undeserving, unfinished soul who, just wants to be understood and laid to rest in the way that she deserved. So, also, you mentioned the Greenbrier Hotel or the Greenbrier Resort. So that's a huge thing as well. I did an episode on that location last season that got a lot of attention just because of it's something that everyone kind of knows a little bit about, but no one really knows a lot about.
Right, the
And
full story, right?
Yeah, there are a lot of interesting aspects as far as the bunker, the founding of the location, just of how old it is and how much history it's seen over the years. Also, I was thinking about the Blennerhassett Island, the hotel, things like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I would love to get that as well. Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, that's one of the main places that I had in mind, just because of the rich history and how much just of how much history and emotion is attached to the story. Um, okay, so in addition to West Virginia, what are some of your dream investigations, if you have those, if you're allowed to share that?
Oh, there's so many. I'd really like to get out to the Queen Mary out in California. I think that'd be a great location. We still want to go international. We were hoping to go last year, but obviously, things. So we couldn't travel last year. But I would love to get to Leap Castle in Ireland. There is also a plantation homestead in Australia. Called the Monte Cristo Plantation. I would love to get to that as well. So we do have plans to go international, but just finding again those local stories, those little known legends and lore. We actually have a spin-off series called Landmarks, Legends and Lore, where we don't so much highlight an investigation, but we highlight different local stories that people might not know about. And so because that's what we love to do, so just finding those small places and really bringing that story to life. The country's riddled with them, and that's what we love to do.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned that. It turns out that I think you and I aren't so different after all, as far as the idea of just the desire of highlighting some of those local stories and, on a bigger level on your part. But, I just, there are so many different, I made some notes and whatever, but as far as like, the typical cryptids and things like that, but also the Lake Shawnee Lake Shawnee Amusement Park
Mhm.
and different places like that that are local to us that are really big deals. But then when you go outside, they're like outside of our state, they're like, okay, I've never heard of that place before, but I've heard of the Amityville house and all these other haunted places that are
Mhm.
really cool in their movies and stuff. But just to be able to do that without the glorification of all the taking it several steps forward without the humanity involved, like you all do, such as like with the tether items and things like that, as far as really reaching into the history and the people of the area, which
Mhm.
is what I'm really interested in overall.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, just finding those small stories that maybe you would know, but everybody outside of your community may not. And so to be able to take those on a national scale, to us is so exciting. Like, for example, one of the landmark legends and lore episodes that we did was on haunting bridges. And, just some of these smaller bridges that have a local story, like one in Oviedo, Florida, and the Oviedo lights. They've been a phenomenon since the 1970s. And nobody knows the reason behind them. But if you're not in Oviedo, Florida, you don't know about these things. So to be able to highlight that is really something that I extremely it really gives me a thrill to be able to bring that to a national audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's amazing. Where can people find that?
www.soulsistersparanormal.com. That's our website.
Okay.
Also on YouTube under Soul Sisters Paranormal.
Okay. Amazing. And that's also where people can find videos of your investigations and stuff, correct?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So if you go to our website, all of our videos they're labeled. So you see the investigation videos first, and then underneath that, if you scroll down, you'll see our landmarks, legends, and lore.
Okay. Amazing. I had the opportunity to check some of those videos out, and awesome. Like I
Oh,
mentioned
thank you.
before, I love knowing about the history, but then also taking a step further, just understanding the now from a different
Mhm.
perspective. It's a whole thing. Um,
Yeah.
is there anything else you'd like for people to know about or to know more about?
No, like I said, I just really appreciate you having me tonight. We'll just finish up real quickly. We didn't really touch that much on the West Virginia State Penitentiary investigation, but that to us was a great investigation. As you said before, we've been there twice, and we did connect with what we feel was the spirit of Red Snyder. really bad guy, because the West Virginia State Penitentiary, it does have that long history. It has a violent history. It was in operation from 1876 to 1995. I think there was 94 people killed in the electric chair there, but there was also 36 homicides between prisoners there as well. So not a great place to be involved with. But as I said before, we are capturing shadow figures. We've captured footsteps, doors slamming. And when we put up the Days of Our Lives episode for Red Snyder, we actually had a really cool K2 session. We had 2 K2 meters, and it was almost like a dueling K2 meter session with him. And when we were done, I said, thank you. And behind us, a male's voice said, no, thank you. And so that to me was extremely intelligent, and one of those things that to us really kind of showed that we were on the right path with what we were doing with the trigger items and with the questions. So for us, just a great location. Everything about West Virginia we love. As I said before, our roots are in Glendale, and just the people there are great. The investigations there are great, and we can't wait to get back.
Well, and again, I'm glad to have you on here, and I'm very thankful that you took your time out of your schedule for us. And also, thank you so much for circling back to the penitentiary. I've had, my mind's just been bouncing all over the place just because of how, what you do touches on so many different parts of, who I am, as far as the humanistic point of view, the paranormal side of things, the historical side of things. My mind's just all over the place. So thanks for circling back to that.
Yeah, sure.
And it really is the penitentiary, and also the asylum or the state hospital is those are really big parts of our history, not only because they're so well known, but also because of just how how much they involve the people from our area.
Absolutely.
As far as the prison people, everyone around this area has people in their family who were sent to that prison at some point, or sent to that hospital at some point,
Yeah,
so or has some
yeah.
connection.
Well, they work there. The interesting thing about the West Virginia State Penitentiary is it was self-sufficient. The prisoners, they helped construct it, and then they had fields that they would tend to the crops. They would make their own soaps and leathers and all of that. I heard stories from Grandpa about how they would have baseball games in there, and people from the community would go in the courtyard and play against the prisoners. So it is a very big part of the community, a very big economy boost for that community as well. So yeah, there's so much when you just step back and not just look at it from a prisoner standpoint, but look at the entire footprint that it has on the entire community and the surround and even the state. There's just so much that you can tell from various aspects of just the historical narrative.
You're absolutely right, and I think a lot of different aspects of our culture and our state generalize to everyone eventually, the 7 degrees of separation or whatever, as far as it's in most cases it's like 1 or 2 around here, but I think that's just so important, is a lot of people are indirectly involved in such a small scale level that just don't know their roots, or the history of their area, that I really hope to speak to on some level, and I thank you for being a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thank you for having me on tonight.
Absolutely. Like I said before, I could talk to you about this kind of stuff for days on end.
Well,
And
let's do episode 2 later, Jordan.
okay, I'll keep a pin in that for sure. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Have a great night.
You too. Thank you.